will start with a special guest who is remote. So Ivan, Herman, who is a W3C staff, is waiting for everybody to be seated inside his home and will appear magically on Zoom soon. So please come. Okay, so welcome, Ivan. Nice to have you with us, even remotely. And it was really important to have Ivan on board today to introduce the new version of EPUB 3, so EPUB 3.3, that will soon come. And Ivan will explain us why it is so important to have a new version. Thank you, Ivan. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laurent. Good afternoon, everyone. I am really sorry I cannot be in Madrid. I had my tickets and my hotel reservation done, and in the last minute I had some private problems which made me impossible to travel. So sorry about that, but that's the category of things that happen. So yes, I will talk about EPUB 3.3 as you can see on the screen, and I hope that works well. I think there is a bit of delay. So a little bit of history. I won't go into all the details that I have on the slides. The slides are available on the web, and I will give you the URL at the very end, so you can look it up later. The important point is that the last version of EPUB that was published by IDPF was 3.1 a few years ago now, which had some issues with backward compatibility. So that essentially was a bit of a dead end. When the organization that made it, IDPF, merged with W3C, then W3C issued a version which was called 3.2, and 3.2 took care of the backward compatibility. It rolled back certain features that were introduced in 3.1 to avoid any problems. And a very important point that was achieved back then is that any 3.01 was a valid 3.2 document. This was the backward compatibility that was needed. We created a working group a few years ago, and that's the one I will talk about, which will publish what is now called EPUB 3.3, and this is what my talk is all about. The important point about 3.3 that it is a working group, which means that it goes through a very rigorous process, which is defined for W3C in general. For all the web standard that be HTML and CSS, the same process applies. And there are 3 points here which are really relevant for the EPUB development. The first is horizontal reviews. This is an ugly jargon at W3C. That means that experts in internationalization, in accessibility, security, privacy, they review the document before it is published and raise issues if it's necessary. And that has happened with the EPUB as well. There were some small changes. I will come back on one a bit later that came out of this review, but it's very important that all these features are built into the standard. There is a rigorous requirement on testing. There is a phase in the development of a standard, which is called candidate recommendation. That's where we are now, which is really concentrating on testing. And I will come back on all the laters on that, all the details on that later, so I don't want to go here. There are also editorial requirements, usually on formats and terminology. These are minor things, although that required quite a lot of work to get it in line, but that's done. The best news of all, before I go into all the details, that every valid 3.2 document is also valid 3.3. So the same backward compatibility that was required for 3.2 is carried for 3.3 as well. That was very important. We didn't want to get into problems. And that also means in some cases, our hands were tied for making changes, but I think for the better good and the general good, it's better to do it this way. What is also very important is that EPUBCheck will be released with a full support of 3.3. There is already a beta version of 3.3 check, and it will come out later. This is not a W3C product per se, but the group working on 3.3 checker is working very closely with us. They have influenced the standard here and there to make things more precise. And I think that's very important that the community can use it as soon as possible. So some new technical features, as I said, we did not concentrate on changes because backward compatibility was important. So there are only very few changes here. I will go through them, but not with a lot of details. We added some new core media types, WebP and Opus. That's the evolution that is happening on the web, and we carried them into the EPUB standard. I don't think it requires too much more explanation. The next point is interesting because this is typically the kind of feature that was introduced as a result of the horizontal review. If you look at the title there, which, well, I don't speak Hebrew, so I cannot read it loudly, but you can see the text there. Displaying this type of bidirectional text is not obvious because the core Unicode information about the directionality of a character is not enough. I don't want to go into the details. It makes your mind a little bit, twisted to understand what happens. But the point is that there is a need for an attribute which tells you that this text should be right to left in this case. This is something that HTML has. We have introduced this feature into the package document as well. So yeah, you can have the title of a bidirectional text as a title properly in EPUB as well. There were a number of new accessibility recommendations for page list and page numbering, and also some additional attributes, refined attributes for the accessibility metadata, which has been worked on, actually, which is still being worked on. And so this is all for the accessibility area. What is very important for us here in Europe, that the accessibility specification is now conformed to the European Accessibility Act that I presume you have heard about. Actually, we have published a separate note that takes the Accessibility Act and point by point compares it to what the accessibility requirements for EPUB say, to show that these two things map to one another. And I think that's from a number of point of view, marketing, etc., is very important. There were also some technical additions, mostly around security. I will not go into the details here because they are very technical things. The web origin is a concept in the web world for browsers and JavaScripts running in browsers, which ensures, which is at the core of a security model, which is used on the web. We have properly introduced that into EPUB as well. And the other area is to define what it means to have a root URL for a package, which is not obvious in the earlier versions. And the goal is to avoid the security risk of leaking into the file system if you interpret an EPUB. That's for reading systems. So this is really from the technical level, but it was very important to get them. And actually, that's about it. We did not do anything more in terms of new features. The changes in the documents are also clarification here and there. So we have made a lot of work in explaining things better, reorganize the spec, but these did not result in any essential new features. There were also editorial changes, which are important. Excuse me. The 3.2 document followed the same thing as was in the previous 3.01 version. And it has a number of documents that I listed here. So if someone wanted to know what can and cannot be done in an EPUB, when generating an EPUB, you had altogether 6 documents to look at. And these documents also talked both about the content of a file and the format of a file, as well as what a reading system should and should not do. We have reorganized that. We have 3 documents that we publish as standard, 3.3, which we refer to as core, reading system, and accessibility. So what we said is the first document should contain everything that a content creator has to know about. So it doesn't only include the package setup, but also the references to XHTML and SVG, the media overlay area, etc. The reading system extracted everything that was only relevant for reading system implementers, and it is now in a separate document. It sort of relates to the EPUB core, even section-wise and in the order of the sections, but it concentrates on reading system. If you do not implement a reading system, you can just ignore that document. You concentrate only on the first one. If you are an implementer of a reading system, then obviously you need that. And then we have the EPUB Accessibility document, which is side by side. It's very important that now Accessibility 1.1 is integral part of all the package. So we will publish the 3 standards together. It is integral part of the effort, which is very important when we know about the importance of accessibility in terms of ebooks. We have new privacy and security sections that, again, was the outcome of the discussion we had with the security and privacy experts. Actually, these sections are still being worked on. It helps the content authors as well as reading system implementers to avoid issues around security and privacy. There is a section in both the reading system document and in the core document about those, and also in the accessibility one, actually, which describe what is called in the jargon threat models. So what are the possible threats in terms of privacy of security? I've listed some of them in the slide. They are elaborated upon in the document, and it's important for both communities to know about these. As I said, we may still do some changes on those, but they are more or less final now. And I come to what is the most important part of the work we do is testing, testing, and testing again. So EPUB interoperability has been one of the features that the community was complaining about the most. When we started the working group, then we had a survey about, what do you want to see in the work around EPUB, and interoperability was the biggest problem. It has long been, a state that we all wanted, but we had no real information about, except for anecdotes. We knew that these books work fine in Apple Books, and it doesn't work on Google Play or on Kobo or whatever. But there were very little published referenceable material about all that. IDPF had a test suite, but it was not complete, and it was not actively maintained anymore, which is more the problem. And they were very big, so they had a collection of EPUB documents, but each EPUB document was relatively large and had a lot of tests in it, so it was relatively difficult to find out what a specific problem may be. So we are working, and we have started working on a new test suite for EPUB that will provide all kinds of information that we think are important in this respect. So it's a large developing set of tests. Each test is a small EPUB 3.3 document, which concentrates on one single feature that is tested. I will come back with examples later. And each document describes in its content what it means to pass a test. When is the test successful or not successful for a specific reading system? And the reading system are supposed to run the test, and they will give us back a report for each test saying yes or no, or not relevant, on whether the test passes or not. At the moment, We have about 130 tests, but it's growing all the time. So, you know, I contributed 2 tests yesterday. Others have been contributing in the past weeks. So actually the 130 might be now more on the 140 side, but it's still not enough, because there is, and here where the process comes in, the W3C process comes in, that for any recommendation in W3C, there has to be a test for every feature that is required, every feature that in our jargon is a must. And these tests must be passed at least by 2 mutually independent implementations. The goal of the whole testing exercise at W3C is to prove that a given feature is implementable, and implementable not only by one system, but possibly 2, 3, or more. And that also shows that the specification itself is consistent and understandable. That's where the whole testing work at W3C comes from. And if a feature is not passing this bar, this at least 2 independent implementations, then it cannot be validated as a normative feature. I will come back later to what that would mean in practice. So we have now a list of available tests. There's a document which lists all the 130 tests. You see an extract. It has a, you know, obviously an identification which actually points to the test itself. It tells us whether the feature that is tested is a must or a should or a may. There is a title, a short description, and references to the specification where what it really tests for. So you see a few examples here for MathML and CSS, etc. As I said, there's a cross-reference. So you see an arrow I cannot show here now. You see an arrow, or maybe I can. Is it visible? Maybe it is. So you see an arrow which points to the part of the specification that this test is made for. So it is MathML, and it must be, you know, presentation MathML, etc. And from the specification, well, from the editorial version of the specification, there's a reference back to the test suite. So there's a cross-reference between the two. So we can see that a must statement has a test, and this is the test, and vice versa. So I will give you 2 examples for the kind of test that we're talking about. Per specification, a reading system must implement MathML. So there is a small test which looks essentially like this, at least for the content document. And of course, you have all the necessary environment. And it's simply a very small piece of MathML. And it tells you that the test passes if the equation appears properly as mathematics and not as plain text. I have run this test on 4 different reading systems on my Mac. I did not do it on reading systems on other devices. It's just for the example. And as you can see, 3 out of 4 does the job. And there is 1 on the lower right-hand corner which does not do the job. So it doesn't pass it. So that's a clear example of where there might be a problem. A different example, which is less obvious, and that's why it's interesting, because the standard includes statement that sometimes content providers or even reading systems may not realize. There is a statement in the specification which says that if you set the language in the package document, let's say you set it to French, that does not mean that the language is set for the content documents themselves. The content documents, say XHTML, has its own way of setting the language, and that dominates. And if it doesn't set the language, then it's considered to be unknown, but it doesn't mean that it must be, in this example, French. So if you look at the example here, the package contains the FR as language, but that doesn't mean that the content is such. So we test this. Now, the trick that we use here to run the test is a feature of HTML, which says the Q element, which is the quote mark, is displayed according to the language. If you are in French, then quoting a text means you use I think the French call it the CD. So not the usual quote marks that you see on the upper left-hand corner. And actually the upper left-hand corner shows a test which does not pass because it should not do that, because it should not display that text as if it was in French. And you see the one with the black background, which does the job correctly. It does not do the French setting. And in here, you can see that 2 out of 4 reading systems get it wrong. So these are just 2 examples of all the kind of tests that we do. I have here, again, an extract of the report that is generated. For the time being, these reports are mostly test purposes because we don't have yet run the whole test suite through real implementations or full implementations. But what you get here is a simple table which says fail or pass. And our goal is that for each row of this table, there should be at least 2 passes. So you see the SVG CSS reference, interestingly, has all lines of fail. If it stayed that way, I hope it does not, but if it stayed that way in long term, that means that feature has a problem. The test suite is concentrating on the EPUB specific features only. That's very important. There are already quite a lot that EPUB introduces. But these tests do not cover the HTML, the CSS, or SVG tests, simply because, first of all, there are already a number of tests for these. Well, a huge test suites for HTML and CSS and SVG. As you can imagine, there are dedicated working groups. There's absolutely no reason for us to reproduce these things. Furthermore, what happens is that most of the newer developments rely on some sort of a web core anyway, what is sometimes referred to as WebView. Let that be the web core coming from Apple for Safari, or from the Chrome development, or from Firefox. And so we could sort of rely on the fact that the core HTML features are covered by modern reading systems, and there is no reason for us to test those. What we really test are all those features that have been introduced for EPUB and nothing more. So what happens if something is not implemented? Early versions of EPUB 3 were very optimistic. Well, the editors of those specs were very optimistic. They included a bunch of features that sounded good, necessary, important, and then they were hoping that reading system would come to the board and do it. If we build it, they will come, was the approach. And unfortunately, that did not work out that way. I mean, more than 10 years later, many have been implemented, but many have not been implemented, as I think all of us who have ever generated an EPUB knows that the problem is there. So one of the side effects, or even central goals of the whole testing exercise, is to allow these things to become clear, what are implemented and what are not implemented, and how widely are they implemented. And there will be, or there might be, some features whose implementation level is unfortunately very low. But that's the way it is, and others should know about it. In the specification, we will have 3 types of unused features that we will identify. Actually, the deprecated features and the legacy features have already been around in earlier versions. We introduce yet another one, the under-implemented features. Under-implemented features will be those that do not get those two implementations through the tests that I referred to. They will be marked in the document very clearly. We don't know yet exactly how, and editorially we will find out. But it has to be made very clear in the specification that, yeah, well, this is a feature that we would like to see as a standard, but we have implementation problem, and you should know about it. The deprecated features, some of you may already know what they are, because as I said, they were there before. There are features that were part of earlier versions of EPUB 3 as well, but it has limited or practically no support. We already know that. Already now, EPUBCheck warns about their usage, EPUB switch being a typical example for that. And we also have legacy features that come from the EPUB 2 time, which some authors, some content providers still put into the document, but they are, I would say, tolerated, but not expected to be implemented. Two examples for features that we feel will end up being under-implemented, just to give you examples. The rendition flow, there's a possibility to put into the package document the requirement for the content to be scrolled continuously or scrolled per document. That is, well, reading system usually have the features to allow for scrolling all along, but this is a feature that they give to the user and they can choose, and they don't seem to follow the prescription of the author if it's in the package document. At least that's the feeling we have now. We will see. Manifest fallback is a much more complicated thing. It allows content providers to put information like, I don't know, some XML files into the package and try to display it, but it's not a core media type. And the idea is that a fallback would give you an HTML alternative in case the reading system doesn't know how to display that particular document. It seems that the features are underutilized and under-implemented. Again, I would be the first to be happy if we were proven wrong. There are already features that we remove from the core specifications, which doesn't mean that the features have been removed altogether. They have been put into what we call a working group note, meaning that the specification is there, it's in a separate document, but it's not considered to be a standard. Multiple renditions is one of those that I have never seen in practice, a multiple rendition document, apart from test cases. Text-to-speech, again, is something that is put into a separate document like that, and the structural semantic vocabulary, which these days is being replaced by ARIA, for many purposes, is now in a separate note as well. It is okay to use these features, but authors should realize that there's a limited availability in reading system for those. That's about what I have time for. I hope that there is still time for discussion. Some closing words. 3.3 is here specification-wise. I mean, the working group at this point has published the candidate recommendation about a month ago, which also means that we consider that the technical side of it is done, unless some major issues and bug reports come in. And as I said, EPUBCheck 3.3, or well, EPUBCheck for 3.3 is on its way to be published. There is already a beta version, so even that can be done today. So even if it's not yet a standard, I think that content providers can already look at the standard now, simply because, as I said, we hope that the version we have today is slightly more readable, more clear than the previous versions. And as I said, there is a backward compatibility. So if you use that for your own content providing, you don't risk a problem with versions. The main emphasis for the group is now on testing. We hope to get a test suite complete by the summer, although the summer is a few weeks away, so I don't know whether we will succeed there. But we then expect the various reading systems to run through the test and have all the testing results by the end of the year. If that happens, then the final standard should be published at the end of winter 2023. Now, I always know that there will always be, it always takes longer than when you plan, but that's what we hope for. How can you help? As I said, review and comment the specifications. Please, the more the merrier. We need reviews. We need people saying this is not understandable, this should be clarified, this is wrong, etc. Test the test suite. Each test is a separate EPUB 3.3 publication. Now, they may be small. Sometimes they are a little bit tricky, and we are, of course, human and we make mistakes. And so it's important that the community look at those tests and raise issues if there are some tests. Obviously, the reading systems, as they run through the test, they will hit some problems and they will report it back to us, but others can do it as well. On the other hand, provide new tests. This is a community effort. This should be a community effort. There is never enough tests. So if you think that there are features that are not properly tested, or you have some experience with some features that need tests, then please give us. There are several people who concentrate on testing on the working group. We are happy to help you to get over the hurdles of how to do it. But we need new one as long as possible. And of course, if you are a reading system implementers, then please run the test suite, publish a report and tell us the report. It's important for all your users to know what you can do and what you cannot do, and maybe along the line, you will find some bugs in your own implementation. So it's a win-win if you do that. Some documents here, there is a URL on the working group homepage, which lists the various documents that are published, the recommendations to be, as well as the various notes that I referred to. There are documents on the tests themselves. So there's a test descriptions that I showed you before, and the implementation report. And there is a separate document on how to contribute to a new test if you feel like doing it. And as I said, these slides can be downloaded from that URL. I don't know whether the conference organizers have put a link to it somewhere. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ivan. So I'm sorry, Ivan, you asked if I could use my smartphone to show the public in front when there are questions. It was a bit difficult technically, so we'll do that without that.
So if somebody fall asleep, I didn't see it.
Yes, but I'm surveying, I'm checking. Are there questions to Ivan? I will just start by saying that this W3C effort on EPUB 3.3 is a member effort. It's a collaborative effort, as Ivan said. So it's the effort of volunteers. So changing all the specification, splitting it in some pieces that were not existing before, a core document and a reading system document, so that everybody finds what is interesting for him. Making more than 130 tests files is the effort of volunteers. Not only W3C members, but members of the community groups, everybody. So it's very important to help these volunteers by, as Ivan said, using these tests, checking the specification. If the compositors that you are working in, or if you are a compositor, do it yourself, check that the specification is good for you. Check, give back feedback to the writers of the specification. They are waiting for that, because after EPUB 3.3, we imagine that this new split of the specification will stay, and there will be no EPUB 4. So we are now at a state where EPUB is really an industrial standard. The documentation starts to be good. Let's make it perfect. And for the test, it's very important that every reading system maker uses these tests. We will do that for Thorium. We know that it will be done also for Aditco. It will be done for Colibrio. It will be done. I hope that somebody will do that for ADE, for iBooks, Apple. So we should have a clear view of what works, what doesn't work in any reading system, and it will be a great comfort for publishers who will know what they can use or not when they create complex EPUBs. Very important. The can I use that we've got on HTML is we have the start of this for EPUB. It was not existing before. Okay, so very important to collaborate on that soon, before the end of the year. So we know that we have lots of work, everybody, but it's a good time to do it now. So are there other questions to Yvan before we move to the next? No, it was so convincing that I see that you are trying to look at the test now. So thank you very much, Yvan. It was really interesting and required to do so now. It's the good time. Have a good day next, and see you soon, I hope.
Thank you for having me.